Y'all, it's David Ducker coming back at you, and today we're going to be talking about star travel. This is how I do it in my space opera games, my cyberpunk, my futuristic games. So I just thought I'd lay it out there in case anyone had not heard of this methodology. It may be useful to you, it may not be useful to you, but I've mainly borrowed from the Warhammer 40K setting. So they use hyperspace. They call it warp space, the immaterium. You could call it jump space. But basically, they posit, much as Star Wars has posited, that there is an alternate dimension which is physically smaller than our dimension. But each point in our dimension has a corresponding one in that dimension. So moving 1 mile in that dimension may be the equivalent of moving 1,000 miles in our dimension. So if you travel there to the corresponding point, you move 1,000 miles, you jump back, now you've moved 100,000 miles. And this allows you to travel between star systems. So that's the basic concept. Star Wars doesn't really go much beyond that, but Warhammer does. They make it more detailed. So in Warhammer, hyperspace was invented trying to duplicate psychic abilities, building a machine that could move matter the way a psychic does with telekinesis. And this machine unexpectedly broke through into another dimension. This dimension may be where psychic power comes from. Psychics leak through some of the physics of this other world and do the impossible with that. In that dimension, very possible, very normal. This dimension, totally different. This machine was able to accomplish just the breaking open of the barrier. And of course, it was discovered that this dimension is smaller than our own. This could facilitate travel. But there are several caveats. This machine is affected by gravity. So the closer it is to a star, the more energy you need to activate the machine, the hyperdrive. So typically, a starship will have to travel beyond the edge of a planetary system before it can engage its hyperdrive. This means that those inside the planetary system can see invasion coming a long way off. They'll see someone drop out of the warp, out of hyperspace, and start to fly into the system. But this flight could take a week. That could be time to summon help, to prepare a defense. So you don't have some of the problems of every planet requiring enough defense at all times to repel the entire navy. Teleportation, when you think about it on this large-term scale, just having a ship or a fleet appear, that can raise very difficult questions as far as how is the military and the economy and the government structured. So by keeping it less advanced, closer to modern day, we can understand how it would work better. Now, travel in hyperspace itself is much faster than sublight, but it's still slow. It can take months to go from star to star. Usually it takes about a week to get to the edge of the system, then anywhere from 1 week up to several months before you arrive, drop out of hyperspace, spend another week flying back in. So that's the structure of the typical voyage. Now, hyperspace has currents, it has eddies, it has storms. It's not empty space the way our stellar universe is. And these storms can push a ship off course. They can slow it down. The storms can wreck a ship. Ion storms in hyperspace. It's difficult to navigate. So most ships need to drop out of hyperspace, take their readings to see where are we, and then go back in. Navigating in hyperspace is very, very difficult for a computer. So you drop out, you say, oh, the current has pushed us off course. We'll adjust, go back in, continue our voyage. This slows down the whole trip. And the currents, the storms, the eddies, they slow down the trip as well. But in this universe, certain psychic individuals have learned to read the tides of the warp. They're called astrogators or navigators. This is something Warhammer borrowed from Dune. But for a ship that has one of these navigators, travel is much faster. You can see and anticipate the currents and eddies, so you don't have to fight them. You can go with the flow. You can avoid warp storms. And you don't have to drop out to take readings constantly. So these individuals, become a professional class. Get paid very, very well for that unique skill. It's very rare to have these individuals. So those are the basic caveats of how it works. So in addition, though, to the hyperdrive on a ship, you can create a warp gateway in a gravity well near a star, in orbit around a planet. It just requires tremendous power draw. An enormous reactor is required for this. And what I have supposited, so this is not borrowed from Warhammer, although there are many antecedents to this, is by having a large enough space station, you could have a large enough reactor, create a hyper gate in orbit around a planet. And this gate would save on travel time tremendously. It would allow worlds to be connected much more closely, much more tightly. And they provide military choke points. So if an enemy fleet arrives at the edge of the system, if you refuse to activate your gate, they arrive at the edge, have to fly in, you will have time, hopefully, to send out a message to have your own fleet come through the gate and meet them in battle. Or perhaps they will be deterred if your fleet arrives and no battle is required. They will flee, hopefully. This also means that worlds with hypergates will be much higher in status, prestige, accessibility. They will be the core worlds. And planets without hypergates will be the outer rim territory. So everything is slowed down. So that's basically how travel works. I'll also discuss briefly communication. I don't have a hyperspace Ansible like Star Trek, where you can talk to anyone anywhere in the universe instantly like a phone call. I've kept it much harder sci-fi, other than that one conceit, psychic powers, which lead to the hyperdrive, because they're one conceit, because they're connected in that way. So we only have radio to play with. Radio takes time to travel. However, radio can be sent through hyperspace. So planets that have a hypergate will also have a hyperspace radio. So they can maintain communication with neighboring systems in close to instantaneous fashion, perhaps only taking days for a radio message to go from one star system to another through the hypergate, rather than taking a huge amount of time to travel without those gates, assuming anyone receives the message, because you have to be in hyperspace to receive these messages, or have an open gateway to receive these messages. And that means in the inner core worlds, communication very quick, within days. The outer rim, not having a hypergate, communication, they can't get hyperspace radio, and we know that regular radio cannot reach that distance in a useful amount of time. So now you're reliant on ships carrying messages manually. and that slows communication down tremendously. Because of that, on the outer rim, the planetary governors have to be largely self-sufficient. They can't wait for orders. They have to take charge with their own initiative. This it shapes the government, how it functions, how it's structured. This is a great example of how the physical laws and the magic system, if you want to call this magic, can shape the government, the military, the economy. So if you haven't laid down the physical laws, you can't lay down the government, the military, and the economy. And a lot of rule sets, of course, start with the government, then they add technology and magic. It's like, well, that government wouldn't exist with that technology, with that magic. It just wouldn't. And that's just mark of a poorly thought out, poorly written RPG. And there are lots out there. But Warhammer answers this question very well. This is my adaptation of that. They don't have hyper gates. Perhaps the last point I will mention is, in addition to astral gators who navigate through hyperspace, there are also astral paths, telepaths who can contact other astropaths anywhere in the universe and have this instant transmission of information. So if you're willing to trust an astropath with a message, and he can find another astropath where you're trying to communicate to, and that astropath can be trusted to get that message to who it's supposed to get to, you can have virtually real-time communication. And obviously, an astropath would be very well paid. They'd supposedly be noble and inscrutable, not warp these messages, not withhold them. But of course, they are only human. And that opens the door for a lot of fun characters, for a lot of fun political intrigue, for a lot of fun storylines. And this whole system, how the space travel works, how the communication works, I think creates a huge amount of possibility for a setting. That's why I've decided to use it rather than Star Trek Warp Drive, rather than Star Wars Hyperdrive, rather than like a jump drive like Battlestar Galactica. I think that this is the most interesting from a story perspective. That's why I've selected it. So that's my outline, hyperspace. Let me know how you do it, how you do FTL, faster than light travel, in your setting. Leave that in the comments below. Let me know what you think of my interpretation of my Frankenstein creation stolen from pop culture and implanted into my own game. And until I see you again, good day and good gaming.